Stop messing around, stop fooling around, stop delaying, stop procrastinating. Get up, get out, get it done. Everything is possible, nothing is a problem, and anything can be overcome. I just get my ass up out of bed, I get my shit together, and I get out and I start the fight. And that will transform you from a mere mortal into a superhuman being. I've never, ever, ever met anybody who told me that they got rich watching their IRA or their 401k.
There's a housing shortage everywhere in our country. There's no inventory. If you look right now, inventory is down so much year over year, and the demand has never been stronger. And it's not the normal demand, it's demand. So like in 2008, the demand for housing was in large part fueled by very relaxed credit and lending standards, and people were able to borrow money that shouldn't have been able to qualify to borrow money. You've heard me talk about the mariachi singer
Yes,
that got this mortgage and probably shouldn't have gotten the mortgage that he got. And there was a lot of that going on in 2008, and that's in large part what fueled the housing crisis that ensued from all that relaxed lending standard practices. Now we don't have a relaxed credit or loan environment. I mean, banks are pretty tight on who they lend to. They've got their processes shored up and you have to qualify. So where is all the money coming from? Well, interest rates are cheap for those that are able to qualify. So there's a lot of demand there because money's cheap. But you've got the pandemic that accelerated decades of housing choices and housing behaviors in the marketplace. It accelerated all of that into 1 year. So people that were otherwise waiting 5 or 10 years to make a move, they did it now. People that were otherwise waiting 5 or 10 or longer years to get a house in the country or get a house out of the city so that they could have more space, they went ahead and did it now. And you're talking decades, potentially, of housing consumer behaviors that were squished into 12 months. And there's that demand, but you know what else you have right now? You've got demand from investors. Small, medium, and large investors are out there looking for single-family homes to buy, to rent out.
Have we seen that before?
We started to see that more after 2008 because there were so many single-family homes in foreclosure that large swaths of property in various states, Arizona and Nevada were big ones, Florida was a big one, California was a big one. Massive swaths of property were getting foreclosed on. And investors could come in and buy pools of non-performing loans and continue the foreclosure process or buy them out of foreclosure in the first place, depending on where you wanted to be in the chain, in the risk chain. It's a little riskier to buy the non-performing loan pool and do the foreclosure yourself than it is to buy a house that's already foreclosed on. But in 2008, investors could buy pools of hundreds and hundreds of properties that were either in foreclosure or likely to soon be in foreclosure that they could finish out the foreclosure on. And this invited private equity and big permanent capital into the single-family home space where they never were before. They never were before. People that bought single-family homes and rented them out were usually sort of smaller one-off investors that wanted a house to rent out or maybe a duplex to rent out, and they couldn't find a duplex, so they got a single-family house and rented it out. That's a different gig than multifamily. When you're talking investing in a single-family house for cash flow, for yield, you're talking about one roof, one boiler, one tenant, and you've got no economies of scale to speak of. In multifamily, we always talk about having as many units under one roof as possible because you can just have greater economies of scale. You can have one maintenance person, one boiler, all these things get spread out across many units, whereas in single family, it doesn't really get spread out over any units except the one that you have.
It's more efficient in that way.
It certainly is. And the market is so starved for yield. There's no yield anywhere. When we say yield, George, we're talking about cash flow, right? We've been using the word cash flow since day one. Cash flow is the holy grail of investing. It's really hard to find yield or cash flow with any investments these days. Sure, you can find 1 or 2%. Why bother? I'd rather stick needles in my eyes and go sit on a beach somewhere. So when we're talking about the investors out there being starved for yield, they want 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10%, like whatever you can get, right? But that's like the range in the marketplace today for investing in yield. Well, single family homes, if bought right and on a market by market basis, can often produce yields in that range. The private equity firms are coming in and they're competing with young couples in the middle class that are looking for a home for their family. So if you're a young middle class couple and you're out looking for a home to buy, maybe it's your first home, maybe it's a step up home, and you're out there bidding, you see something you like, you put in an offer, you are probably not bidding against John and Jane Smith anymore. You're likely bidding against Mountain View Capital and Grand Ocean View Capital and Canyon Top Capital and these huge grandiose private equity firms that are dispatching bidders in all of the good markets around the country to find single family homes that they can purchase and rent out for yield. And they know where those neighborhoods are and they know where those homes are. So don't be fooled by that. They know exactly what they're doing. And they're willing to outpay and outspend you on a bid for a house by 10, 20, 50, 100,000, whatever it is, to get it and then get that yield by renting it out to a tenant. So the single family housing market continues to expand and proliferate and grow into an asset class that's desirable not only for George, you and I and our friends and families because we need places to live, but for huge private equity and hedge funds that have so much capital and nowhere to deploy it that they're buying single family homes in onesies and twosies all around the country. Because no longer can you buy portfolios of 1,000 single family homes like you could have done in 2009 and 2010. Now you have to buy them one-off, and so they're dispatching people all over the place, and they're bidding against you and I for a house.
And presumably that drives up the price.
Absolutely, it drives up. There's more demand.
Yeah.
Same amount of supply, and it's very limited, we know that, but there's more demand. You not only have the middle-class home-buying public, but now you've got these people out there trying to buy the homes for the big private equity and hedge funds. And that's a huge amount of money coming into a space where it really wasn't there. We started to see the birth of this about 13 years ago after the 2008 crisis. It's here to stay. There's no yield anywhere. If you can find a 9, 10%, 11%, 8% yield on investing in something, and it's real estate, you're going to give it a second look, especially if it's residential.
Yeah, I think I heard in Houston, it's like 24% in some neighborhoods is all investor.
You've got markets going up in double digits, George. You're absolutely right. I've read that too. Texas is such a hot market around Houston, around Austin. You're seeing mid to high teen appreciation in home prices over a year ago. I mean, it's big. So you're talking about homes and markets that historically would enjoy 1 or 2 or 3% increases a year. Anything more than 3% was considered a hot market. You get it to 4 or 5%, it's like, wow, that's a big increase. So right now we're talking about markets. You've got places around Nashville, Austin. It's no longer the city centers, New York and LA. They used to be the recipients of all the big housing appreciation, which occurred year after year. But now it's these smaller areas. You've got places, Memphis is hot. You've got places in the suburbs of Chicago, and the Pacific Northwest is off the charts. And these places are going up 15, 20% a year in some cases. Why? Because there's so much demand for housing. There's a shortage of housing. The private equity firms are coming in. They're buying up everything, along with Mr. and Mrs. Smith and their kids, your neighbors, my cousins, your friends. Everybody's in the bathtub right now. There's a lot of demand for housing. Joe Biden just came out today and said his suggestion for solving our nation's housing crisis is to loosen zoning and building regulations so that people were motivated to build more. Thank God he said that, because really these states and these municipalities need to follow suit. If there's available land for there to be building and it comports with zoning without being too obnoxious about it, obviously you're not going to put an apartment building in a commercial part of town where there's car washes and parking lots, but you can put townhomes, multi-housing, apartment buildings, single-family homes. You can put that housing product in parts of town where you have available land and the highest and best use. You can get some density out of that, and create housing for people, that's how you're going to alleviate the housing crisis in America. You can't regulate your way out of it. You can't restrict it, because all you do is restrict and constrict the supply. There's tons of demand. The demand isn't going away. You have to create more supply. The way you create more supply is to build your way out of it. And California's got to look into this. New York's got to look into this. The densely populated MSAs all have to look into this. You got to let people build. You got to create incentives. You're going to generate tax revenue if you do. You're going to increase your rateable base in the municipality. All of these towns and states are starved for money. That's why marijuana is becoming legal. That's why online gambling and electronic betting is becoming legal. And you got to get money into these places. The governments don't have any. So they're going to look to you and I to fill their budgets with money. And the way that they're also going to be able to do that is by creating more ratables. The way you create more ratables is let them build. Loosen the zoning, loosen the regulations, create incentives for investors and developers to come in, let them build. George, we live here in a town right now that's going through all sorts of housing debate. You got to let people build. I'm sure that no matter where you live out there, that there's a shortage of supply, prices are increasing, rents are going up, the cost of living is becoming higher and higher and higher. You got to build your way out of it. You got to talk to your leaders, your governments, your governors, your city council people. Let them build. That's the way you solve this issue. You can't keep the supply the same when the population's getting bigger and expect that housing prices are going to relax. And you can't regulate your way out of it, because 100 out of 100 times when you put regulation on the supply of housing, all you do is create more expensive housing. It's supply and demand with everything. It certainly is with housing. You got to create more supply. Build, build, build.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. You mentioned the difference between single-family homes and multifamily. I was curious, do you have any particular advice for property owners that are trying to transition from, maybe if they've invested or purchased in single-family and want to move to multifamily?
It's funny. Most of the people I know in my industry are multifamily housing operators and owners. I can see why multifamily is a popular sector to get into. As we said before, you have economies of scale. You can have 50 units under one roof, and that's a business that you can make a go of. Conversely, if you're an investor in a single family house, you got one roof, one boiler, one yard, one tenant. If that one tenant moves out, you're 100% vacant. If I've got a 50 unit building and one tenant moves out, I'm 2% vacant. So there's a difference in the economics and the way your P&L is going to look, depending on if you're an investor and operator in multifamily or single family. I wouldn't touch, personally, single family as an investment class. I don't want a portfolio of 100 houses. I mean, look, I'll take a portfolio of 100 houses, but I'm not seeking that. I'm not seeking to get myself into a situation where I'm managing potentially a portfolio of 100 houses, each with single tenants in each property. That's a single tenant property. That's one door. When one door goes vacant, you're 100% vacant. You have no support. You have no economic support to keep going until you can turn that unit and re-rent it in a week or 2 or 3. Because in multifamily, in my markets, George, as you know, we operate in supply-constrained, high-demand markets. We get a vacancy, we can rent it in a matter of a couple of days to a couple of weeks. It's never really more than that. God forbid you get a vacancy in a house. To turn that house, it's not like turning a 780 square foot, 1-bedroom apartment. It's going to be larger. It's going to be more work. I don't know what the tenant did on the way out, but not only do you have to worry about interior painting and cleaning for the next tenant, but now you got to worry about exterior, landscaping, grass, damage to the exterior. Like, I don't know what the story is. Every house is different, but it's funny. I know some guys that they don't even want to touch multifamily. All they want to do is invest in single family, and they've got their model, they've got their markets, they've got their price point. So they cite what the median price of a home is in America as $220,000. They won't look at anything that costs more than $220,000. Now, for $220,000, you're likely not going to be very active in the northeast corridor of the United States where we're located, because around here, from Boston down to DC, and any sort of good area with a good school district, things are like $700,000-800,000 and up, something like that. So this guy is not buying around here, but where is he buying? He's going to Indiana, he's going to Arkansas, he's going to Michigan, he's going to parts of Arizona and Nevada, he's going to Western California, he's going to, parts of the country that maybe aren't as densely populated, but there's still healthy employment, there's still beautiful places to live, and people are moving to these places that are more affordable and less expensive, and they're going to buy or rent from him. If he's focusing on properties that are $220,000 and less, he's going to have a lot of product to handle that demand. I wouldn't participate in that. I'm looking for as many units under one roof as I can get. So for those that want to transition from single to multifamily, look, running single family or multifamily, you have to perfect your box. We've talked about this, and I love saying the phrase, it's all about the box. So a house is a box. An apartment is a box. Once you've perfected the operations and management of one unit, it's really the same thing to operate 10 as it is to operate 50, 100, or 1,000, because they're all the same. You can systemize that. It's recurring, it's repetitive, it's expected, and it's known. For anybody looking to transition from single to multi, just have your systems down and become an expert in what it's like to operate a single unit, a 2-unit, a 4-plex, and a 10-plex, that kind of thing. And once you can master the scalability of simply repeating your systems over and over and over again on a daily basis, because everything in our business is a cycle. We have a monthly cycle, a quarterly cycle, and an annual cycle to providing housing to the public. So once you master the cycle and master the systems needed to collect rent, pay bills, fix apartments, move people in, move people out, generally that's about it. Once you've mastered that, you can take on as many units as you have access to. It doesn't become a matter of efficacy, it becomes a matter of scalability. We talked recently about that, George.
Yeah.
All you have to do is get your mind right for scaling. If you can operate 10 units, you can operate 100 units. If you can operate 100 units, you can operate 10,000 units. All you have to do is be able to scale and address the needs that are coming. You know what those needs are. They're the same day in and day out, week in and week out, and month out. It's the same thing. So just staff to handle those needs that are coming, and you could scale to as large as amount of units as you can get your hands on.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Yeah, it seems it's more of an issue of operations first, but then kind of just how hungry you are and how much you.
Well, you got to have a pipeline.
Yeah.
You got to be good at what you do. You got to know how to collect rent. You got to know how to speak to people. You got to know how to hire people or staff for maintenance and fix a sink or a toilet or a light bulb or whatever. And you have to know how to market and promote your product and advertise it and show it to people and sign leases. You have to be good at all that stuff. But once you have to have a pipeline. So what's your pipeline going to be? If you're transitioning from single family to multifamily, you're coming in the multifamily. It's a very competitive space right now. Hey, single family is too. We just talked about that. Look, it's competitive everywhere. Let's just agree on that. Choose where you're going to be. Transitioning from single to multi, not such a difficult move if you're good at multiple location management. You got a house here, a house here, a house down here, a house up here. If you've got multiple houses, you're a candidate for transitioning to multifamily, because multifamily is multiple headaches under one roof, and multiple houses is multiple headaches in different locations. I think you'll find it to be easier.
Yeah, you mentioned being good at leases. We talked a lot about a lot of great lease tips.
Well, our viewers love the lease tips.
Those videos are the ones that really resonate with people. They love that.
And you know what? They give me a hard time too. Some of the comments are from people like the haters that chime in and say, "Oh, motherfucker, greedy landlord, I would never rent from you if you have that language in your lease." I don't know why they would say that. I'm not doing it to hurt people, and we don't hurt people, but it's business, and you have to be protected, and you have to offer a great product, and you have to have the right contract document. Look, there has to be limits and restrictions on everything. Otherwise, your business life is just a free-for-all. So we have lease language that helps us. But what was your question about
I was
leases?
just going to ask, we've talked a lot about what makes a good lease. Is there anything that makes a bad lease? Are there things that you...
not listening to me about what to put in your lease makes a bad lease, for sure. And it's different state by state. George, we also put out suggestions on what to put in your leases, and then people will chime in, well, in my state, you can't do that. In my state, yes, that's true. You have to know state by state. Look, I'm in New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania. I'm in the Northeast. Around here, I know what the deal is. I know what the laws and regs are. So we have our leases written accordingly. I'm thinking specifically back to when we said no drilling satellite dishes into the building. And people were chiming in with, oh, you can't restrict people from getting broadband. And, oh, you can't restrict people from putting up a flag. Well, I don't know the deal in those states. You're right. If you can't restrict people from getting broadband, and by the way, restricting people from drilling satellite dishes doesn't prevent them from getting broadband. We have Verizon, Fios, and Optimum, Comcast in our buildings as alternatives. So it's certainly accessible. We're not restricting anybody from anything except for drilling a fucking hole.
Right. It's not a denial of service. It's
Yeah.
Right.
And the thing about putting up flagpoles as a right in the state, if it's a single family house, maybe that's a more appropriate dynamic and feature of the landlord-tenant relationship for a tenant to say, hey, can I put up a flagpole? And maybe as the property owner, you have to say yes, because maybe in that state, you have to say yes to that. But in an apartment building, no one's putting up a flagpole, I can promise you. Not in New Jersey, they're not.
I would also imagine there's other ways to hoist a flag and get a flag visible without drilling into it.
If you're coming into my 80-unit building in New Jersey, there's no fucking way you're drilling holes so that you can put up a flagpole. I'm all for flags. Believe me, I have one at my house. Like, I love waving a flag. I'm not trying to restrict anybody's patriotism or freedom of speech or anything like that. I just don't want you drilling into my building to do it.
Totally.
So, lease tips. So, I was thinking yesterday about a few things. So, we've talked a little bit about tips for language relating to appliances. I've thought of a few. So, number one, many of our units offer in-unit washer and dryer. We love the stackable thin twin unit. It's narrow. It doesn't take up a lot of space in the closet, and they're stackable, which makes it often possible to convert what was previously just a regular clothing closet into a laundry closet. So we'll put the stackables in there. Now, every appliance has its own use and weight limits. So the thin twin has weight limits on how much weight you can put in the washing machine portion of it, because as you know, it spins, and if it's too heavy and it's loaded with too much weight, it'll spin so much that it'll spin off axis and it'll break. And this is a very, very common appliance repair that property owners out there get maintenance requests for, and you can protect against it by having language in your lease. So you have to have language in your lease that advises the tenant not to go above 10 pounds, for example. The heaviest things are jeans and towels and linens, because they get wet, they're heavy to start with, and when they get wet, they're just gonna kill your washing machine if you overload your washing machine. So have weight limits in your leases. Check your manufacturer's operating manual for what the weight limits are, because every time you buy an appliance, they give you a manual that tells you what the weight limits are. Duplicate the weight limits into your lease language and put tenants on notice not to go over the weight limit. Because when they call you and say, hey, my washing machine broke, and you go there and you see there's 28 pounds of jeans and towels in the washing machine, they were on notice not to do that, and it's a $350 repair. That's the first thing I would say. With laundry machines, absolutely put the weight limits of your machine into the lease and advise tenants not to load up their machines beyond the weight limit. Otherwise, there's going to be a problem, and it's definitely going to break if they do. George, there's another one. Dishwashers. Today's dishwashers, all of them have a part of the inside door where you can fill them up with rinse aid. Rinse aid is a product that helps the contents of your dishwasher dry better, dry cleaner, and dry more efficiently when it's running through the cycle of your dishwashing machine. And it also is good for the ongoing recurring operations of the appliance. So again, we check our users' manuals, and it says the manufacturer recommends to use rinse aid, or over time, it can cause certain things to break inside the machine. So we take that language, we put it into our leases, and we advise tenants that rinse aid is required. Because at move out, what we'll do is we'll run the cycle of the dishwasher, and we'll be able to know if they've been using rinse aid or not. It's a very simple thing to do, and it costs maybe $4 to buy a little thing of rinse aid. But use the rinse aid, because we know at move out if tenants haven't been, and it damages the appliances. And then we have to call for service to the appliance, and then we have to charge the tenant. We put it in the lease. I recommend that you put all of that kind of stuff in your lease. if you're offering a full suite of appliances. Now look, at our buildings, I want everybody to know, we make a special effort. We go out of our way economically and time-wise to procure beautiful stainless steel appliance packages for all of our units. So we're not talking about builder grade, crappy white appliances that are cheap and break. We're not talking about that kind of stuff. We spend a lot of money on appliances because we feel our marketplace appreciates the upgrades of appliances in the units that they're moving into. So we provide those. So in exchange for us providing a great appliance package, among the other things that we provide in the apartment, we put into our leases instructions and requirements for how to use and maintain the appliances. There are appliances, they're not yours. You're going to use them while you're living there, and we want you to use them happy and healthily, but you got to use them right and you can't cause damage. So when you don't use rinse aid and when you overload the washing machine, all it does is break stuff. George, lease tip number 3, how to motivate people to pay on time. So sometimes, not all the times, but in some cases in our leases, we put in a pay on time credit. So what is a pay on time credit? If the apartment was normally going to rent for $1,500, we will gross up the rent by $50 or $100 to $1,550 or $1,600, but then add in language that says if the tenant pays on time, they can take a $100 a month credit, bringing them back down to the $1,500 originally that they were hoping to pay and that we were willing to accept. So pay on time credits are great bits of language to use in your leases to motivate people to pay on time. Otherwise, you're going to charge the lower price and then tack on a late fee. You know, you can see psychologically sort of how that's a different approach, right? Would you rather charge a lower price and tack on a late fee, or would you rather gross up the price and give a credit? You know, it depends on the situation. Often we find ourselves asking the tenant if they want to take a pay on time credit instead, and it works out great. So George, I think you're going to find that in those cases where the parties want to choose to have the higher rent in the lease and then have a pay on time credit, that it works and that the property owner can expect a greater regularity of on-time payments. The tenant feels like they're getting some value and they're not being hounded with late fees. I think that's good for the property owner-tenant relationship. So look into that, pay on time credits. It's a great way to create a good relationship with you and your resident and to have good collections, regularity. Check it out. So late fees. We just talked about late fees and using pay on time credits to get rid of all the late fee language. But let's say you have late fee language in your lease, because after all, that's the norm. That's the regular bit of language that exists in most leases. How do you structure your late fees? So in our areas, typically, we have a 5% late fee. We're not regulated on how much of a late fee we can charge in some markets, so we'll tailor that depending on the credit worthiness and financial wherewithal of the tenant that we let in. If there's an applicant that wants to apply for an apartment and they maybe have lower income and lower credit, we might have a higher late fee and make the late fee applicable after the 3rd or 4th day of the month as opposed to the 7th or the 10th day of the month. Because we want to make sure that they're incentivized to get their payment in on time. So there's 2 parts of late fees that you have to look at. One is the amount of the late fee that you're going to charge, and 2 is the date at which you're going to charge the late fee. When does the rent become late? Rent's due on the 1st. Are they late on the 2nd? Are they late on the 3rd? Are they late on the 12th? What's your deal in your market? In our market, where it's a very supply-constrained, high-demand market, we expect a lot from our residents. We give them a lot in exchange, but we expect a lot from them. At the very least, what we expect is to receive rent on time and in full every month. So our late fees will typically start 3 or 5 days after the 1st of the month. Rent is due on the 1st of the month. We have our staff receiving rent on the 1st. And by the 3rd, we're looking at the list and we're seeing who hasn't paid yet, and we're making those calls. And by the 5th, we're applying late fees. So 2 parts to late fees, the amount of the late fee and the date at which you charge it. But you can modify those. You can have a larger late fee and a shorter date. Now, if you've got a credit-constrained applicant or an income-constrained applicant, but you're going to accept them into your house or your apartment, you may want to consider having a higher amount of late fee and a shorter date. That means that they're going to pay more quicker if they don't pay you on time. They're going to be motivated to send you that check on or before the first of the month. Use late fees as a tool to create the kind of relationship that you want with your resident. You can expand or reduce the restrictions and the amounts of fees and penalties that you're charging depending on the relationship you want to have and that you're seeking to have. If you've got a high credit, high income applicant, it's not likely that you're going to be paid late as much as it is perhaps with a low credit, low income applicant. So use your late fee structure accordingly. Those are some lease tips for today. Let me know what you think. And don't call me a bad guy for charging a late fee. Come on. Do you call up your bank when you're late on your mortgage and yell at them? Do you call up your car loan payment company and yell at them if you've been late? Don't call your property owner and yell at them. They got bills to pay too.
Like, I've never thought about a lease in that way that you just described, like a tool to craft relationship. And that's in many ways what it is. Well, speaking of relationship, we all know friendship is tremendously important. And in 2020, it was really difficult, I think, for a lot of people because we were separated. We weren't able to see people in
Zoom.
person. Yeah, exactly.
Typical.
Yeah. How did you deal with that? How did you cultivate those relationships?
I had my Zooms, and that's okay. I mean, it all sucked, but it was okay. It was nice to see people. I sent a lot of gifts. I always stay plugged in with people, George. The pandemic was nothing new or different for me because I am always really actively staying plugged in with my people and my relationships. I think it's important to do regardless of if it's a pandemic or not. But for me last year, lots of gift sending, lots of funny joke messages, lots of phone calls, lots of FaceTimes. And you have to do that stuff anyway. But one of the things that I did more than I did in other years was I sent a lot of gifts. I was a big customer on Goldbelly. I was a big customer on a lot of these gift websites, and I sent funny and fun things to people, and I got a phone call back.
Of those gifts. Those were really nice.
And I got phone calls and I got emails and texts. Thank you, and it helped me stay plugged in with them, and it was a pleasure to do anyway. So I think that stuff's important to do. That's what I did.
Is that something other people did for you when you were younger that made you think about that, or?
I remember being in camp and getting the care package from mom and dad. Mm-hmm. And when that care package arrived, I remember how I felt. Like I couldn't wait to open it up. Comic books, t-shirts, candy, like whatever, and it brought such a smile to my face. And when they announced your name over the loudspeaker, Peter Siegel, come to the post office, you have a package. It was like, ooh, like the whole place was like, ooh, Peter got a package, right? And I remember that feeling, and I love when you can create that with someone. So sending a gift, hopefully the recipient gets it, they open it up, and I had a good friend of mine had a baby boy last week, and they had the bris ceremony today. So I sent over a bunch of stuff to the house, and I couldn't be there, of course, but it was down in Florida. But I love that stuff. It's families getting together, and if it wasn't a pandemic, perhaps I would have received an invitation and I would have been there. But I love being at someone's house. It's a happy time. It's a life moment. So I hated that I couldn't be there. So I sent a bunch of food and flowers and whatever, and they loved it, and they all took pictures and sent me the pictures, and hey, we miss you, and that's good stuff, if that's what life's all about. So I do that kind of stuff. I was heavy on the gift websites for the past year. Doesn't have to be a lot of money. I spent a few $100 today because I sent a big spread of bagels and lox and food and flowers and stuff. But it doesn't have to be expensive. You can send inexpensive gifts. You don't have to spend a lot of money. The point is the thought, and the recipient will call you or reach out to you, and you'll then have a conversation with them. Hey, I miss you. Wish I could have been there. I love you. That kind of stuff. And that ultimately is what it's about. To hear I love you, and to say I love you, and to say I wish I could be with you. I mean, that's what you ultimately want to get to by sending a gift. I sent a lot of gifts, and it worked for me.
I reached out recently on Instagram to a bunch of our followers and asked was there anything that they wanted to see from us or kind of content that they were curious about?
What'd they say?
And one of the big ones that kept coming back was a day in the life of Peter Siegel. So we might film something along those lines at some point in the future, but I was curious if you would want to talk a little bit about do you have a typical day? What does a day in the life feel for you?
I don't have a typical day. I have a few standard versions that I'll go with depending on what's happening. If it's a field day where I'm on site and I'm driving around looking at projects and construction and development, that starts very early, and I'm on site, spend maybe a half hour at each location, and by lunchtime I'm back at the office. And it's important to get your eyes on the construction and the development and see the details as they're emerging and growing.
Do you usually schedule that, or do they reach out and let you know?
I schedule it. We'll schedule it with our project manager, and she'll take me around and show me what's happening and what subs have finished up and what inspections we've got for rough and finish. And I'll go look at everything and make sure it looks right, and it does 99.9% of the time, but it's important for me to see that with my own eyes.
Yep.
And usually get that wrapped up by lunch, and then I'll come back to the office and start pounding away at the rest of my day. I get probably, George, 400 or 500 emails a day, which is incredible. And not much of it is spam anymore. I spent the pandemic getting rid of all my spam emails, so I get a whole lot of email. And some of it I'm just copied on as it goes to other team members, and I see it just so I can keep my finger on the pulse. But some of it is directed to me, so I have to deal with all of that. I have to call people back, and I'm looking for opportunities, and I'm keeping relationships going with investors and partners and vendors. But you know what?
Specific blocks of time for that?
I try to. You've heard me talk about my use of the calendar. I use Google Calendar. The night before, I arrange my whole day. I study what the day is going to look like. When I wake up, I know immediately what I have to get to. I don't fuck around. I don't wake up slowly. I don't drag my feet. I don't have like a lazy morning. I wake up and I get right to my first few things, and I pound them out because I want to create white space on my calendar. I want to either delete the event or move it over and reschedule it if I don't get to it. So I start immediately with that stuff. Of course, after I shower and eat and maybe meditate or stretch for a minute, but I get immediately in there and
create momentum.
I do. Momentum's key. I want to have a high degree of output, so I stick to my schedule. My days, my weeks, my months even get scheduled way in advance. I had recently conversations with someone offering an investment opportunity last week, and they want me to fly to California, and then they want me to go into New York to meet with them. I just don't have the ability to clear my schedule a week or two ahead of time and fly out to California. So I know what my year looks like. I know what my days look like. I know what everything looks like when I wake up in the morning. And I have certain flexibility at certain times of the year. Now's not one of those times. And I stick to it. But I am connecting with my people, my team. I'm looking for new opportunities. I'm with my family. Let's schedule a few day in the life of me for those that are interested. I can't imagine why you are, but if you are, I'll give it to you. And we'll go around and we'll do some site tours, and we'll see what's happening and what it takes to run a portfolio of a lot of buildings, some that are mature, some that are under development, running a full staff. And maybe you'll learn something from it or see something in there that you'll want to ask a question about, but I'm happy to share it with you.
Yeah, give the people what they want. Sounds good. All right, last question before we move on to Desk Quests. If you started from zero, you had no cash, no assets, no credit, and you just had to start over, what would you do? How would
knowing
you
what I know now after being in business for 30 years?
Knowing what you know now, but now you had nothing. Yeah.
No problem. I wish I knew then what I know now, because I started with no money and no credit back then, but I just didn't know shit about anything. But now I know shit. George, if I didn't have a penny, I would seek opportunities. There's lots of money. There's not a lot of opportunities. Find opportunity and you can create value and opportunity for yourself. So I would go find things that are going to make money for people. I'd bring it to them and say, let's be partners on it. I found it. You put up the money. Let's split it 95-5 or 90-10 or 80-20 or whatever you can get. and I'll work it, and I'll report to you every week or every month, and this is how we're going to make money. Here's the capital event. Here's the exit plan. Here's the business plan. What do you say? Put up the money. Someone's going to say yes at some point. If it's a real opportunity, and if you sound right and look right, and if you know what you're talking about, someone's going to say yes.
Fantastic. All right, well, Peter, it's been a few weeks. Are you ready for ZestQuest?
I will try to be.
Okay.
I would say that I enjoyed the vacation from ZestQuest, but I really didn't.
Yeah. All right. Well, fantastic.
I will tell you
yes.
that one of the last ZestQuests you asked me was the story about, you got me to tell the story about taking out the trash.
Yes, I did. Yeah.
And my older brother called me and he said, Peter, I can't believe you fucked that story up. I'm like, I didn't get that. What do you mean? I didn't get anything wrong. He said, it's not take out the trash, it's take out the garbage. And he found it important to remind me that the correct word that we used as kids was, Peter, take out the garbage. Hank, take out the garbage. Jeff, take out the garbage. Scott, take out the garbage. Apparently it was meaningful to him to differentiate between trash and garbage. I use the word trash. Sorry, bro. I'm copping to it now. Take out the garbage. So he totally gave me shit about that.
I love the specificity of that. That's, yeah.
What did you like about it?
Specificity. What is it?
I think it's specificity.
Specificity. Thank you.
But can you try and say it again?
Specificity.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. So that's the word I was looking for. Specificity.
Yeah. So
thank you, Peter. That's, if I learned nothing else today, I learned how to pronounce that word.
Specificity is an important thing in our world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I appreciate it, Peter.
All right. What's your ZestQuest, George?
So ZestQuest is, what makes a good party for you?
What makes a
good party?
Ooh, a specialty of mine. I consider myself a top-notch party provider. Lots of people, although I do like the smaller, intimate ones, but I like big parties. Lots of food, great food. You know, some parties you go to and it's like bar only. Some parties you go to and it's like BYO. And some parties you go to and it's like food and drink and entertainment. I like the food, drink, entertainment parties. I'll tell you what I don't like about parties. I don't like being, in general, I don't like resolving myself to crowded, large public space where I'm like jammed up with people. So I'll never want to be shoulder to shoulder, especially outside in a hot, sweaty environment. I went to a Fish concert a couple of summers ago before the pandemic, and it was my first Fish concert.
Okay.
Had a great time. I loved it. But I'll tell you what I noticed is that all these like fat, hairy, sweaty people were like outside dancing and rubbing up against me and like bumping into me, and it was fucking gross. So I don't like that about parties.
Were you extremely high? Because I think that's
I was not extremely high.
I think that's the problem. That's a requirement.
I was not extremely high, but I was extremely grossed out when these hairy bears were coming up and like bouncing off me and dancing like Frisbee Dodgers, and I didn't love that part. But I digress. So parties, man, I love being able to talk. So the entertainment can't be too loud that it overpowers people being able to be together and talk and spend time together. I love a beautiful outdoor scene or venue.
Yeah, proper setting.
Yeah. Although I do remember lots of house parties back in the day in New York City, down in these basements of these Soho and Tribeca buildings, these large spaces. God forbid there ever be a fire in one of those, and thankfully there was never. But they were awesome places. They were quite crowded and hot and sweaty. But I was a kid then.
Yeah.
But look, parties are about having fun, getting people together, laughing, enjoying yourself. So really anything that yields that is I'm cool with.
Yeah.
But if I were throwing a party, I throw good parties, George. Yeah. Maybe you'll see that one day.
Yeah. Be so blessed.
Yeah.
All right, well, last question for today, Peter. We actually talked about, I asked you this question the very first podcast we recorded, but we didn't end up using that recording, so I'm going to ask it again.
Please.
What books have changed your life, or what book has really changed your life? I can even feed you some of the ones that we talked about that day if you want, but I was curious.
What books have changed my life? I can't remember how I answered this. I'm gonna try and answer it and hope that I've been consistent.
Okay. Yeah.
I remember you asked me what the most gifted book was, and I said Many Lives, Many Masters.
Yep.
But that's not the same question.
No. Or I think that maybe the way I phrased it the first time was changed your way of thinking.
Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Successful People. Mm-hmm. Did I say that before?
Classic. I think you did mention that one. Yeah.
That's consistent.
That's a classic. And then there's 2 other ones that you mentioned. Now this is like a game show.
Who Moved My Cheese? I remember I always liked the business books, so it has to be one of those. Winston Churchill biography.
That was one of them.
That was one.
Yeah.
So,
What about Winston Churchill? Do you find,
he's a fascinating guy for me, an historical figure. He was sought after for his mindfulness, for his poise, for his experience in a few different fields. People that run things, be it private sector, public sector, I have an interest in that because it takes a certain kind of person to know how to govern, to be a leader, to make decisions on behalf of many. And Winston Churchill was one of these guys that was able to do that. It wasn't always the most popular decision, but he got it done and he stood behind it, and it ended up being most of the time the right thing for his people. And it's a tough thing to do because everyone's got something to say. Everyone's a critic. When you're the one making decisions, everyone's the judge and jury. You got to be able to take that. He could take it.
And such a long career. I mean, really, for that kind of work.
Yeah. I very, very interesting guy. The way he thought about things was very interesting to me. I'm a big fan of Winston Churchill. Always have been.
Yeah.
Maybe I got that from my dad because my dad read those books
also
too.
Also a fan. Yeah. Cool. Well, that's all I got for you today.
Wimpy.
The one that you didn't mention that you mentioned the first time was Sun Tzu.
Sun Tzu.
Art of War.
Art of War.
Classic.
Yeah.
Sure. But
great.
You'll be forgiven for
great. Now we can talk about it. Great book. Great philosophy. Great book. Great author.
Yeah, I feel like Sun Tzu. It was Sun Tzu and like Fountainhead were like the two big business.
Did you read Fountainhead?
I haven't read Fountainhead. No. I'm familiar with Ayn Rand and her objectivism and all that stuff. But, no, I need to undertake it at some point. But those things are massive.
They are. Fountainhead's a massive undertaking, and it's you know what it's. I have Fountainhead on the shelf in my office, and people come in, and ultimately it evokes comment and criticism.
Yeah.
People come in, they see it, they're like, "Oh, you read Fountainhead?"
Yeah, some people love it, some people hate it, some people
it says something about me just having read it. Like I guess I agree with it there from a bad guy, or I don't know what the implication is.
Yeah.
But it's one of these books where people see it and they immediately will draw a conclusion about you.
Yeah.
And I think everyone should read it, regardless of how you feel politically or socially about issues. I think everyone should read it.
It's an interesting Rorschach test to see how people react to that. Yeah, I think we've talked about Jordan Peterson before off camera, but he's an interesting character.
So smart. I love him.
He's a well-known conservative thinker, but he started in the Socialist Party up in Canada, and he was given Ayn Rand's writings by the head of the this librarian who was an active member of the Socialist Party at that time, and she gave it to him because she thought he would disagree with a lot of the writings. He ended up agreeing with
I didn't hear that story about Jordan Peterson.
But yeah, Ayn Rand's one of those kind of polarizing figures.
You know what I love about Jordan Peterson? He knows his shit. He knows his facts, he knows his science, he knows his theory. When you try and speak with him or debate or argue points with him, he can cite lots of facts and backup. It's a very refreshing thing to see because most people are just talking out of their asses and not really knowing the facts on what they're speaking of. And I find that Jordan Peterson provides factually based dialogue with his counterparts, and it's nice to hear because I want to hear people talk about facts, not about just adopting the side of the fence that they subscribe to politically and pushing the agenda like normal. It's nice.
Yeah, I think with a lot of these figures, Jordan Peterson, Ayn Rand, whomever you want to choose, I think a lot of people forget that they're human, and that I certainly don't agree with many things that both of them, espouse. There's a lot of things that I do agree with, but it's that thing of you don't have to accept somebody for 100% of who they are to respect them as a human being. You don't.
It's a great point. I think that's lacking a lot today.
Yeah.
I think today it's, hey, if you don't think like me, you're a bad person.
Right. Yeah.
And man, that's a fucking bummer. I'll tell you what.
Well, and because you're never going to do that. You're never going to agree with 100% of what that other person thinks or says, but you need to be able to respect them and have that conversation.
There's not a whole lot of respect and conversation happening because if someone doesn't think like you do, lately I see that there is no talking going on. Yeah. It's very divisive and very fragmented and very angry these days.
Yeah.
So I hope that changes, and I hope we can learn to respect that people will disagree with us and have other opinions than us, and we can still talk about it.
Yeah. Oh, I'm grateful to have this time to talk with you, Peter.
Thank you. Do we disagree on anything?
Not today, but I'm sure we will in the future.
Yeah.
All right. Have a great week.
Thanks, everybody.